Listen, this is Mr. Eugene, and the discussion of today is on how society encouraged women to hate men. This is not a rant. This is not blame. This is a long, honest breakdown of how we got here and why so many people feel disconnected, tired, and confused. Now let us get into it. It did not start with women. It started with a message. A quiet whisper repeated so many times it stopped sounding like an opinion and started sounding like truth. Be strong. Be independent. You do not need a man. At first it sounded harmless, even noble. It sounded like healing. It sounded like progress. But seeds do not announce what they will become. They just grow. And over time, that seed did not grow into freedom. It grew into division. Because every movement that begins in pain eventually learns to feed on pain. And that is what happened. For decades, women were told a simple story. That men were the reason for their suffering. The reason for their silence. The reason for their sacrifices. The reason their potential was delayed or denied. It was an easy story. Easy to understand, even easier to sell. The villain was clear, the hero was waiting, and once a story like that takes hold, everything starts reinforcing it. Movies began showing women breaking free from men. Not from bad men, but from men in general. Commercials turned fathers into jokes. Sitcoms turned husbands into fools. Talk shows mocked masculinity and called it humor. But it was not humor, it was conditioning, because when you repeat a message long enough, the mind stops questioning it. And before anyone realized it, an entire generation began seeing men not as partners, but as obstacles. Not because women were evil, but because they were raised inside the message. Every headline, every trend, every viral clip carried the same undertone. Men hold you back. Men are the problem. You will never be free until you outgrow them. And people believed it. Because when you are told you have been wronged, anger feels like justice. Resentment feels like empowerment. And rejection feels like healing. But here is the quiet truth nobody admits. You cannot teach hate without breaking something inside the student. And that is exactly what happened. The modern woman did not become strong. She became guarded. She learned to build her strength on rejection instead of balance. She learned to speak louder but feel less. She learned to protect herself from the very thing she once longed for, masculine warmth and steady presence. That is the tragedy. The seed was never about liberation. It was about separation. Because a divided world is easier to control. And while men and women were busy blaming each other, someone else was quietly profiting from the fight. The ones who planted the seed, the ones who watered it, the ones who watched it grow into the confusion we now live in. Every movement needs a villain. Without one, there is no story, no momentum, no purpose. So when society began rewriting its narrative, it found the perfect target: men. It did not happen overnight. It happened slowly. Headline by headline, scene by scene, classroom by classroom. The story became simple enough for everyone to repeat. Men built the world, but they built it for themselves. Men held power, but they used it to suppress. Suddenly, every achievement carried a hidden crime, and masculinity itself became guilty by association. Strength, leadership, stoicism, discipline, the very traits that built civilizations were rebranded as toxic, outdated, and dangerous. And the chaos that replaced them was sold as progress. The inversion was complete the moment men began apologizing for being what they were born to be. Fathers were mocked. Husbands were turned into punchlines. Young boys were told to sit still and soften while girls were praised for expression. It was not balance. It was reversal. Words changed. Provider became patriarch. Protector became oppressor. Masculine became a warning label. The more manhood was attacked, the more women were told they were rising. But they were not rising. They were reacting. And reaction is not liberation, it is dependency in disguise. Because when you define yourself by opposition, you become chained to the thing you claim to hate. Now, decades later, you can feel the consequences everywhere. Men walking on eggshells, afraid to lead, afraid to speak, afraid to be too much of anything. Women unsure how to recognize protection versus control, guidance versus dominance, love versus weakness. That is what inversion does. It does not erase truth. It flips it upside down. Strength becomes guilt, care becomes manipulation, partnership becomes a battle for moral superiority. It was never about equality, it was about power redistribution and keeping people too busy fighting to notice who was writing the rules. Rebellion used to mean something sacred. It meant standing up against real chains, real pain, real injustice. But somewhere along the way, rebellion was hijacked, rebranded, and sold back as something new. Freedom from men. It sounded empowering. It looked heroic. It felt righteous. But it was not rebellion against oppression, it was rebellion against connection. Women never hated men. They were taught to. They were taught that love makes them weak, that compromise means submission, that trusting a man means betraying every woman who suffered before them. That is how the rebellion lost its heart. It became performance, anger without direction, defiance without a cause. You cannot build peace by destroying what completes you. Now you see it everywhere, in music, in movies, in casual conversation. Pride in not needing anyone. Influencers repeating the same mantra, never depend on a man. He is replaceable. You are enough. And maybe she is enough. But being enough does not mean being alone. Independence without intimacy is not power. It is loneliness dressed in confidence. What started as empowerment became exhaustion because no one told the truth, that softness does not weaken the feminine. It strengthens it. That harmony creates more power than dominance ever could. Real rebellion would have been balance, not rejection, not war, but balance does not sell. Outrage sells. Conflict keeps people scrolling. Division keeps people consuming. So the rebellion kept burning, and the more it burned, the more it consumed the feminine spirit itself. Now you can see it, in posture, in tone, in the eyes. Warmth replaced by defense, inspiration replaced by competition, and she cannot understand why no one wants to stand beside her anymore. That is the cost of a rebellion that forgot its purpose. Hatred does not appear on its own. It is built carefully, word by word, image by image. Behind every dividing movement, there is always someone counting profit. When men and women were united, families were strong, communities were stable. People needed less from systems, but when they were separated, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, they became perfect consumers, perfectly distracted, perfectly divided. This war between men and women is not natural. It is engineered. Commercials mocking fathers, media glorifying independence while mocking loyalty, music celebrating excess while sneering at commitment. Every message carries the same undertone. Do not trust, do not commit, do not connect, because lonely people buy more. Angry people scroll longer, confused people obey easier. While we argue over blame, someone else is winning. Corporations thrive when homes fall apart. Governments grow stronger when families weaken. Media profits when outrage trends. This is not conspiracy, it is business, and we are the product. If men and women respected each other again, entire industries would collapse. Dating apps, self-help cycles, validation economies, fulfilled people do not need constant reassurance. Peaceful people do not need escape. So the war continues, not with violence, but with narratives. Masculinity labeled dangerous, femininity labeled weak, both sides believing it. Because it is easier than facing the truth. We were never meant to be enemies. Love used to be simple, two people facing the world together. Not equal in every trait, but aligned. Partnership died the moment equality turned into rivalry. When connection became competition, when love became leverage, now relationships feel like negotiations. Who gives more? Who sacrifices less? Who holds power? No one asks who feels safe. Kindness feels strategic. Disagreement feels manipulative. Touch feels transactional. Needing someone is called weakness. Depending on anyone is called failure. So people build walls instead of homes. Men feel unwanted unless they perform. Women feel unsafe unless they dominate. Both secretly missing the world they were taught to hate. Partnership did not die because people stopped caring. It died because people stopped believing it was safe to care. When you are taught that men are dangerous and women are deceptive, trust never gets a chance. Love becomes a cold war. Smiles outside, suspicion underneath. The game was designed so both sides lose. Men did not fight back loudly. They withdrew. No marches, no manifestos, just silence. They tried adapting, softening, explaining. Nothing worked. Lead and you are controlling. Follow and you are weak. Provide and it is expected. Struggle and it is shame. So they learned to disappear emotionally and spiritually. They built peace in solitude, work, training, creation. Silence became the only place they were not wrong. Women felt the absence without understanding it. The world felt colder, less grounded. Men did not stop caring. They stopped being punished for caring. That silence is not apathy, it is defense. Now the reckoning has begun. The slogans feel empty. The empowerment feels heavy. The loneliness feels louder. Both sides are realizing something is wrong, not with each other, but with the story. You cannot erase human nature. You cannot kill the need for connection. Truth waits patiently. Masculinity is not toxic, it is protective. Femininity is not weak. It is healing. When both meet without ego, something ancient returns. The truth was never on either side. It was in the balance, not competition. Completion. That is the reckoning, not a revolution, a return. If this message resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more honest conversations. This is Mr. Eugene. I will see you in the next one.